හරිම සුමුදුයි.
Tonight on First at 9, this Tuesday, the 2nd of April 2024. Parliamentary consent. Parliament approves value-added tax increase to 18% with a majority vote. Baltimore bridge disaster. Sri Lanka to begin probe into the toxic waste that was said to be aboard the cargo ship en route to Sri Lanka. Emerging Sri Lanka. Keeping to reforms is paramount as Sri Lanka emerges from the crisis, outlines World Bank. Vast potential awaits as South Asia races to be the fastest growing region in the next 24 months. Cabinet approval. Construction of stalled expressway projects can only be resumed once debt restructuring achieved. Special permission to the tourism industry to import vehicles.
ඔබේ විශ්වාසය දෙනු සෙන්සුරයින් දැන් ළඟමැති ෆාමසියෙන් ලබාගත හැක.
From Derana, this is Derana First at 9 with Ndivari Amuata and Mahish Jani. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
A very good evening, everyone. Welcome to First at 9, your primetime news bulletin that brings you all the information, news and information from here at home and abroad. A very good evening, Indivari. I hope you're not going to have a cough fit tonight. Are you okay?
I'm doing very well, thank you. But these things happen to human beings.
It does happen. Of course it does. It does.
So a very good evening and a very warm welcome. You're joining us this Tuesday for the very latest once again from here in Sri Lanka at home and from overseas. But of course the top story is related to Sri Lanka of a vessel en route to Sri Lanka but faced a disaster elsewhere. So it's an
all the way in the United States, it gets hammered into a bridge, and then we find out there are certain questionable cargo that was en route to Sri Lanka.
56 in fact of those.
Exactly, and the question remains, why were they coming here? Was it being taken as a dumping ground here in Sri Lanka, which is not the suitable thing to do? Or is this actually the tip of the iceberg? Is something bigger occurring without our knowledge?
I was about to say, what's alarming is that we are unaware how many of such vessels may have entered Sri Lanka with such toxic waste, hazardous material being carried on board. So thankfully there is an investigation that will be launched into it. Apart from that, we also have some decisions taken by the Cabinet of Ministers to approve the importation of vehicles. But for the tourism industry,
it's still on a tight leash because opening that particular avenue would result in the entire reserves that we have drying up, and that is not a place that Sri Lanka wants to be in. And also the health strike seems to be continuing. What exactly is occurring there, we will get you the latest on that as well. International news, what's happening in Gaza is being questioned all over the world. So there are lots of stories to bring it to you tonight. So we're going to start our bulletin, and we're going to start with that story about the ship in the United States named Dali. Now, Sri Lanka Customs confirmed that the Sri Lankan agent of the cargo ship named Dali that collapsed into the Francis Key Scott Bridge of the Patapsco River will be questioned regarding the cargo that was en route to Sri Lanka.
Now, this decision was taken after US media reported that the vessel was carrying hazardous material to Sri Lanka.
Now, the speaker for the Sri Lanka Customs, Sivali Akuruguda, however, said that the mandatory report regarding the transported material to be forwarded to the customs by the agent did not follow, as it can only happen if the ship entered into Sri Lankan waters.
The container ship Dali, which was sailing under the flag of Singapore, started sailing from Baltimore to Colombo on the 26th of March. However, the ship crashed onto the Francis Scott Key Bridge in the USA. The 948 feet long container ship with 4,700 containers was scheduled to arrive at the Colombo port on the 22nd of April. According to a recent American media report, 56 containers of the ship contained corrosive, flammable, various hazardous materials and explosives, as well as Class 9 hazardous materials, including lithium batteries. According to media reports, the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board is currently monitoring the contents of the other 4,644 containers on the Dali ship.
සාමාන්‍යයෙන් ලංකාවට නැවක් එනකොට
Usually, when a ship is bound for Sri Lanka, the ship's agent in Sri Lanka provides a report regarding the amount of containers, the content, and the number of staff. The report is provided after the ship enters Sri Lankan waters. Since it has not arrived, there is no report regarding this. Therefore, as customs, we don't exactly know whether this was coming to Sri Lanka or whether there were any containers to unload here. We are locating the agent in Sri Lanka and we can get more details regarding the ship from them.
නැවේ කවුද ඒජන්තවරයා ලංකාවේ ඉන්න ඔහුගෙන් අපිට ඉතුරු විස්තර ලබා ගන්න පුළුවන්.
Sri Lanka is a signatory to the Basel Convention on the Control of Hazardous Waste Transport and Disposal. The agreement aims to reduce the transport of hazardous wastes between countries and specifically prevent the movement of hazardous wastes from developed countries to less developed countries.
New Dulux Pentolite Hygiene Plus. Refreshing walls for generations.
Now, the vessel that was bound for Sri Lanka was taken up for discussion on the lack of American reports that the ship was carrying toxic material into the country in Parliament today. State Minister of Environment Janaka Wakkumbara said that a special investigation will be carried out into the incident. Meanwhile, during Parliament today, the Gazette issued to increase value-added tax to 18% was passed with a majority of 36 votes in favour of the Gazette.
ඇමරිකාවේ බෝල්ටිමෝ පාලම මත කඩා වැටුණා මේ සිංගප්පූරු භාණ්ඩ ප්‍රවාහන නෞකාවක්. ඒකේ නම ඩාලි.
US media reports that the Singaporean cargo vessel Dali was carrying 764 metric tons of hazardous material to Sri Lanka. There was a total of 4,700 containers in this vessel. Reports say that 56 of them contained explosives and lithium-ion batteries and corrosives, flammables and miscellaneous hazardous materials. According to this convention, no permission has been granted from the Central Environment Authority. This is a grave situation. It is only because it collapsed that we are aware that it was heading to Sri Lanka.
නැව හැප්පුණ නිසායි අපිට දැනගන්නට ලැබුණේ මේක ලංකාවට එන නැවක් කියලා.
අපි දන්නවා මේක ලංකාවේ ඒජන්ට් විදියට ඉන්න කම්පැනි විතර විශාල කම්පැනියක්.
We know that the agent in Sri Lanka for this ship is a big firm. This was bound for the South Asia Gateway Terminal, but there may have been a possibility that the regulations for incoming ships to this terminal would have been relaxed.
මේ කාරණේ සම්බන්ධව මේ වෙනකොටත් මධ්‍යම පරිසර අධිකාරිය පරීක්ෂණයක් පවත්වනවා.
There is an investigation concerning this currently underway at the Central Environmental Authority. The contents of the ship had not been informed to the CEA. However, it has been informed to the port and to customs. What you said was true. It was because of the accident that we got to learn about the cargo in the ship. We will take measures to investigate and inform the House regarding this.
MP Partali Champika Ranawaka, as the chairman of the Committee on Ways and Means, presented this report to the Parliament. In it, clear data has been given regarding individual millionaires and billionaires that have been exempted from tax. Please take measures to include them in the tax net and reduce the VAT. I also urge that you raise the taxable income threshold from 250,000 rupees and not from 100,000 rupees.
We are talking about accumulated taxes for the past 3 decades. We have collected 35% of it within a short period of time. There is pending litigation against 90% of them. If we take accumulated taxes in the customs, 90% of taxes are due from state-owned enterprises. If we take excise taxes, 60% of it are fines that are due.
Parliament then temporarily adjourned till 4:30 p.m. as most of the speakers from the government and the opposition side were not present in the House.
එනිසා පාර්ලිමේන්තුවේ කටයුතු අද දින පසරු 4 දක්වා తాවකාලිකව අත්හිටවනු ලැබේ.
We were in Parliament. There are social media messages circulating alleging that we are roaming the streets without attending Parliament. I am heading the Committee on Public Finance. I am stating this for the record. Everyone was in Parliament. It is true that taxes were increased through a gazette and currently 18% VAT is being charged. But if you don't get it passed in Parliament today, VAT will decrease to 15% from tomorrow onwards. It is only today that the government is trying to legalize this VAT. We strictly state that we are completely against this VAT hike. Meanwhile, at the port city, tax exemptions are being given left, right and centre. How can that be?
After presenting the Gazette for the increase of VAT to Parliament, a vote was taken as the opposition opposed the Gazette. The order under the value-added tax, which proposed to increase the VAT percentage from 15% to 18%, was passed in Parliament with a majority of 36 votes. A total of 55 MPs voted in favour, while 19 MPs voted against.
The government, with a view to developing the tourism sector, has decided to temporarily suspend the restrictions on vehicle imports, granting permission for the import of 1,000 tourist transport vehicles. Now, speaking further at the cabinet briefing, cabinet spokesperson Dr. Bandula Gunawardena added that the government plans to recommence the construction of the country's expressway network following the completion of the debt restructuring process.
Considering that buses and vans are essential for tourism, a decision was taken to allow the import of vehicles necessary for the transportation of tourists. This decision was taken after considering the recommendations of committees appointed by the President for this purpose. The tourism sector was the highest contributor to resolving the nation's foreign exchange crisis. Our aim is to protect and develop this industry. That is the reason for allowing the import of 1,000 vehicles. There is a great hope of completing Sri Lanka's expressway network. However, it is impossible to obtain loans for this purpose without restructuring existing debts. We have requested foreign investors to invest in the proposed expressway projects, but they are unwilling to make that commitment because the international agreements regarding debt restructuring are yet to be finalized. The government surmises that if debt restructuring process can be completed by May or June, it will be possible to raise funds for the completion of the expressway network. We are willing to enter into discussions with any local investor who is prepared to make a sufficient capital investment for this purpose. Unfortunately, that discussion is yet to materialize.
The Cabinet of Ministers approved a proposal to provide sanitary napkins free of charge to 800,000 female students at remote and isolated schools in Sri Lanka, as well as estate schools and urban schools with a student body of less fortunate female students. This initiative is to be implemented in April 2024, that's this month. In the meantime, land rights are to be now conferred to some 4,000 families living in estates which belong to regional estate companies and state-owned estate companies with immediate effect. This initiative was proposed to the Cabinet of Ministers as a joint resolution furnished by President Ranil Wickremesinghe and the Minister of Water Supply and Estate Infrastructure Facilities Development.
The Cabinet of Ministers approved a proposal by President Ranil Wickremesinghe to hand the Ahalepola Valawa and its grounds over to the Temple of Truth Relic through a title deed of sacred premises. The report submitted to the Cabinet by the Secretary to the President following discussions with all relevant parties recommended that the building should be transferred to the Temple of Truth Relic since the project to establish a museum in the building is already established. The museum is aimed at presenting information about the history and the environmental background of the Kingdom of Kandy, as well as creating local and foreign tourist attractions. The Cabinet of Ministers approved the proposal presented by the Minister of Agriculture and Plantation Industries to lift the temporary ban on the import of black gram, with the stipulation to import 2,000 metric tons of black gram only through the State Trading Corporation, the National Food Promotion Board and the Hadabim Authority of Sri Lanka, subject to the special commodity tax imposed by the Special Commodities Act No. 48 of 2007. The decision comes as a measure taken to address the shortage of black gram in the market during the festive seasons in April and December. The proposal presented by the Minister of Power and Energy to award contracts for the construction and operation of solar photovoltaic power plants with a total capacity of 9 megawatts was approved by the Cabinet of Ministers. On the 22nd of May last year, the Cabinet approved a call for proposals to establish 7 megawatt solar photovoltaic power plants. In another decision taken by the Cabinet of Ministers, approval was given for the proposal put forward by the Minister of Sports and Youth Affairs to submit to Parliament for approval the Anti-Doping Regulations No. 9 of 2023, published under the provisions of Convention Against Doping in Sports Act No. 33 of 2013 in the Extraordinary Gazette Notification No. 2373/14. As per the proposal, the list of prohibited substances should be published in the Gazette annually. Further, since it has been reported that doping is given to athletes as well as animals used in sports, a list of doping substances has also been published for horse sports and horse racing from this year. Further approval was granted to the resolution furnished by the Minister of Port Shipping and Aviation Services to award the contract of obtaining 4 wide-body aircrafts on monitoring lease facility, along with an additional aircraft. The approval to award the contract of obtaining 2 aircrafts out of the requirement of 5 aircrafts with wide-body aircrafts for Sri Lankan Aviation Company Limited under operational lease scheme was provided on the 18th of March last year. As such, contracts relevant to obtaining 2 aircrafts from Oryx Aviation for a monthly lease of $360,000 for a period of 6 years, and contracts relevant to obtaining 2 aircrafts from Airgo Capital Limited for a monthly lease of $365,000 for a period of 8 years has been approved. The Cabinet of Ministers also approved the resolution furnished by the Minister of Port Shipping and Aviation to award the contract for work in the project that includes the construction of the main terminal building, Passenger Bridge No. 2 and Passenger Bridge No. 3 under Step 2 of Phase 2 of the Bandaranaike International Airport Development Project. As such, approval was given to award the contract for the relevant activities to Access Engineering plc, which submitted the bid for substantial responses. 4 bids have been received for the bidding invitation under the National Competitive Bidding Methodology for the said constructions from contractors registered under the Construction Industries Development Authority, going along with the decision of the Cabinet of Ministers dated 30th of October 2023. In a separate decision, the Cabinet of Ministers approved a proposal furnished by the Minister of Power and Energy to award a contract to Access International Private Limited in establishing a production facility for radioactive-based cyclotron pharmaceuticals on the basis of building, ownership and operating. The Cabinet approved the implementation of a cyclotron-based radioactive pharmaceutical in Sri Lanka with the loan and grants from local banks on the 29th of March 2021. Accordingly, on the basis of building, ownership and operating, expressions of interest have been called for and 5 resolutions in this regard have been received. Meanwhile, a proposal put forward by the Minister of Education to provide sanitary napkins free of charge annually from April 2024 to 800,000 female students studying in mostly remote schools, isolated schools, estate schools and to urban schools with less privileged female students has been approved by the Cabinet of Ministers. In the meantime, the Cabinet of Ministers also approved a joint resolution furnished by President Ranil Wickremesinghe and the Minister of Water Supply and Estate Infrastructure Facilities Development to award land rights to the estate community. Under a program initiated to award land rights to the estate community, 4,151 families living in the estates which belong to regional estate companies and state-owned estate companies have been identified as eligible to receive land rights. Accordingly, the Cabinet approved the proposal to award freehold grants with immediate effect for the same lands those families are residing in at present.
Well, the country manager of the World Bank, Chiyo Khanda, commented on the growth of Sri Lanka, adding that despite the promising trend depicted by the latest data of the country, Sri Lanka still faces elevated poverty levels, income inequality and labour market concerns.
Senior economist of the World Bank, Richard Walker, however, praised the reforms program and added that continued commitment to the reforms are an essential bridge towards Sri Lanka's recovery and prosperity, highlighting that the country's path to recovery still remains narrow.
Now, these comments were made against the backdrop where Francisca Orsog, World Bank's chief economist for the region, commented on South Asia's growth and emphasized that it is expected to be strong at 6% in this year and is expected to remain the fastest growing region in the world for the next 2 years.
A special event was held in Colombo under the patronage of World Bank Chief Economist of the South Asian region, Francisca Orsog. During the event, the latest edition of the World Bank's biannual South Asia Development Update and Sri Lanka's Development Update, Bridge to Recovery, were published.
Growth in South Asia continues to be the fastest among emerging market and developing country regions. However, that largely reflects strength in India. So for the region as a whole, we expect growth to reach 6% and 6.1% in 2024 and 25 respectively. But once you take out India, it's more like 3.75% in 2024 and 4.25% in 2025. One reason why the rest of the region is pretty much growing in line with other emerging markets and developing economies is that they include 3 countries that are among the 1/4 of emerging markets and developing economies that are facing faced at some point in the last year or two financial stress. These countries are doing pretty much in line, growing pretty much in line with other emerging markets and developing economies that are also financially stressed and much less fast than before the pandemic. More than other emerging market and developing economies, South Asia relies on the public sector for growth.
The latest data shows that some promising trend. The economy is contracting throughout pace, over 2.3% in 2023, and witnessing easing inflation, declining interest rate, and current account surplus for the first time showed in the last 50 years. These positive developments have been supported by a boost in the remittances and as well as the resurgence in tourism. However, the journey is far from over. The poverty rates remained elevated, and also recovery hinges upon maintaining stability and continuing reforms to complete the stabilization and move more toward the path to our growth, medium-term growth.
So the 3 key messages you can see there: the economy is stabilizing, high poverty, inequality and vulnerability persist despite macroeconomic gains, sustained support for the poor and continued commitment to the reforms are an essential bridge to recovery and prosperity. So in terms of the first message, a few points are: firstly, growth turned positive in the second half of 23. So you can see here, this shows quarterly growth. Through at least most of 22 into 23, you can see the deep contraction. But in the latter half of 23, you can see some positive growth, some green shoots, largely driven by services, certain industries, and food. So despite these sort of macro positive signs, Sri Lanka's path to recovery remains narrow. So over the medium term, we expect, or at least this year, we expect some positive growth and moderate recovery over the medium term. We certainly don't see a quick bounce back.
President Ranil Wickremesinghe today appointed WKD Wijeratne as the Director General of the Commission to investigate allegations of bribery and corruption. Applications for the position were called for on the 10th of February 2024. Accordingly, WKD Wijeratne was appointed to the position in accordance with the provisions of the new Anti-Corruption Act of 2023. Wijeratne had served as the Bribery Commission's Director General under the previous administration.
Now, the Health Trade Unions Alliance strike over the disturbance availability and transport allowance was called off a short while ago. Now, earlier, the Health Trade Unions Alliance strike was over the disturbance availability and transport allowance. Now, following the large-scale protest launched in front of the Colombo National Hospital Union today, representatives participated in a discussion with government officials. Now, 72 health trade unions yesterday launched a series of protests alongside 4-hour-long token strikes at 5 major hospitals across the island over their unfulfilled requests.
Now, State Minister of Finance Ranjit Siambalapitiya stated that instructions have been provided to transfer all officers attached to the Excise Department's Narcotics Prevention Unit with effect immediate. This comes in the aftermath of the apprehension of 4 officers of the Narcotic Prevention Unit of the Excise Department engaged in the transportation of a consignment of Kerala cannabis last evening.
A raid was conducted in the Puttlam area last evening based on a tip received by the Puttlam Police Narcotics Bureau on the possible transportation of a consignment of Kerala cannabis. During the raid, 4 individuals who were transporting 12 packages of Kerala cannabis weighing over 2 kilograms were taken into police custody. It was further revealed that the 4 suspects were officers attached to the Narcotics Prevention Unit of the Excise Department. Following investigations, 4 other individuals who had 10 parcels of Kerala cannabis in possession were taken into custody. Police revealed that all 22 seized parcels contained 48 kilograms and 452 grams of Kerala cannabis. The 8 suspects are to be detained for a span of 7 days for questioning, with further investigations into the incident currently underway. Taking the matter into consideration, State Minister of Finance Ranjit Siambalapitiya stated that instructions have been issued to transfer all officers of the Excise Department's Narcotics Prevention Unit with immediate effect. He added that the 4 officers who were arrested while transporting Kerala cannabis have been interdicted.
All 2 suspects were arrested by the Kadwala police in connection to murder of a 52-year-old woman residing in the same area. Meanwhile, a student of the Peradeniya University was reported dead after being hit by a train near the Peradeniya railway station. With that, here's a look at more local news across the island in brief.
2 suspects were arrested by the Kadwala police in connection to the murder of a 52-year-old woman residing in Kadwala. During the interrogation, the suspects revealed that the victim was murdered following a long-standing dispute, while further investigations unveiled that one of the suspects was a drug addict. The 2 suspects, who were produced before the Kadwala Magistrates Court, were remanded till the 5th of April. Meanwhile, a student of the Peradeniya University was reported dead after being hit by a train near the Peradeniya railway station. According to police, the victim was identified as a student of the Faculty of Arts of the Peradeniya University. In other local news, 1 person was left dead after a fatal accident which occurred in the Dunagaha area. Accordingly, a van travelling from Negombo to the Dulapiti area collided with a nearby vehicle and tragically ran over the individual. The fatal accident was recorded on nearby CCTV camera.
Business news now. After a 4-year hiatus, Thai Airways flight TG307 arrived at Bandar Naik International Airport on Sunday night. Now departing from Bangkok, the flight carried approximately 150 foreign tourists, including 5 nationals. According to Katnaik Airport authorities, flights between Thai and Sri Lanka, or Bangkok and Sri Lanka, were now operating daily. The flight and its passengers were welcomed by Minister of Ports, Shipping and Aviation Nima Siripala De Silva at the arrival terminal. Now, a special cultural dance performance was also organized by the airport and aviation services to commemorate the occasion and welcome the flight and its passengers. In a statement, Minister Nima Siripala De Silva expressed confidence that the reintroduction of daily flights by Thai Airways would further boost tourist arrivals. Additionally, he proposed that reduced airfare could attract more Sri Lankan travelers to visit Thailand, thereby fostering increased bilateral tourism.
Industrial and financial stocks gained for the day, coupled with turnover crossing 2 billion rupees at the Colombo Stock Exchange, pushing the main indices to positive territory. The World Bank raised its forecast for Sri Lanka's economy, projecting a growth of 2.2% or 50 basis points, and real GDP growth also is expected to strengthen further to 2.5% in 2025, with modest recoveries in reserves, remittances and tourism, as the World Bank Development Report stated. This translated to both indices flying relatively high, as the CSE All Share Price Index settled 0.60% higher at 11,547.89. The S&P SL 20 index of more liquid stocks ended trading at 3,350.13, 0.63% higher. Selinco Insurance PLC and John Keells Holdings were the top gainers on the ASPI, up 8.3% and 1.4% respectively. Trading volume on the index fell 73.4 million shares from the previous session. Meanwhile, foreign investors were net buyers, purchasing stocks worth 1.824, while the domestic investors were net sellers.
Now, Securities and Exchange Commission of Sri Lanka, in collaboration with the Colombo Stock Exchange, carried out yet another investor forum recently. Now, with that, let's take a look at more corporate news for the day.
An investor forum was conducted recently in Nuwara by the Securities and Exchange Commission of Sri Lanka together with the Colombo Stock Exchange. The forum was aimed at raising awareness on the importance of investor education with regard to the investment opportunities that exist in the stock market and investor protection. In the meantime, a virtual meeting was convened between the Central Bank of Sri Lanka and the Central Bank of Bahrain recently. The dialogue highlighted key action items for future collaboration, including the establishment of a regulatory sandbox, implementation of open banking frameworks, exploration of central bank digital currency, advancement of digital banking solutions, and facilitation of cross-border fast payments.
Well, that wraps up tonight's edition of First at 9 on Other Derana 24. We'll see you again tomorrow at the same time with more news from across Sri Lanka and around the world. I'm Indivari Amuatta.
And I'm Mahesh Johnny. Have a good night.
For news and information you can trust 24 hours a day, visit otherderana.lk.